my name is Gavin. I'm a senior researcher at the Society, Work and Politics Institute, which is a research institute in the University of Witwatersrand. And there I've been running a research project called Mining and Rural Transformation in Southern Africa, which is a comparative research project looking at the new social transformations which are being set in motion by the expansion of mining activity, particularly into the former homeland areas of South Africa. And I'm also on the International Advisory Board of the Review of African Political Economy. So I guess I'm kind of attending this event with both of those hats on as somebody from SWAP, which has played a large part in organising the South African workshop, and also as a member of the journal and a contributing editor to the journal as well. And what was the next question?
What were your expectations with this workshop, and how is it different, if it is at all, from other workshops, conferences, or any other workshops that you've participated in?
Well, my expectations around the workshop were, I didn't actually know what to expect. What I did know was that what ROPE were trying to do with this Connection series was reconnect the journal with the continent in a different way, and which would also reconnect it with the journal's past as well. So the journal, as most people would know, was actually born of the moment of the great liberation struggles in the continent, and indeed was first placed in the continent when it started. It was meant to be a forum for serious analysis, political economy analysis, which in some way or another would inform the movements of the time and the politics of the time, trying to move towards sort of clarity of the situations that they were facing and the kind of political differences which were emerging. So that was the initial mandate really of the journal. Circumstances led it to be based within the UK. Like all journals, it came under pressure to become perhaps more of an academic journal, and whilst it always retained that commitment to informed analysis from the continent, those pressures were there as well, and perhaps an opening up between the journal and the kind of movements, the new movements which were emerging on the continent. And indeed, probably part of that happened because of actually the way in which the continent was really battered through the 1980s by structural adjustment programs and so on, and the big period of downturn which came in the continent. So the journal's had to really refine its feet now with the period that we're in at the beginning of the 21st century. So this was an effort to bring it back onto the continent and connect social and political activism on the continent with the concerns of the journal. So I understood that this was the mandate of the workshops, but quite how that would actually work out in practice, I wasn't sure. It was going to be interesting to see. And I have to say I've been really, really pleasantly surprised. I think the panels that we've had in this Johannesburg workshop have been incredibly well organised. They've had really, really good level of analysis of many of the contemporary issues which we're facing at the moment. But there's also been a real effort actually to have voices of ordinary people who are coming from movements inside of that as well, and to kind of bring that together into a conversation. Of course, there's always room for improvement, as they are with these things. I mean, it's happening within the confines of it being a closed workshop, which means it's the number of people involved is always going to be small. There are questions of who's selected, what they represent, and all of that. But nevertheless, as an effort to catalyse that sort of conversation between the journal and between activists and academics who are aligned to movements on the continent, I think it's been incredibly successful, and certainly for my own part I've learned an awful lot. It really has been incredibly informative and exciting, and in many ways inspiring.
So what would you say is the single most important takeaway back into your work, back into other spaces in which you occupy, and building on?
Well, I think actually what's really struck me about it has been the seriousness and the quality of the level of discussion, actually strategically. So a lot of the questions have really been about what are the best ways to organise resistance? What are the best ways to put possible visions of transformation actually into action? What are the kind of problems around that? What are the best sort of organisational forms? What are the social forces involved? What is the kind of politics we need within the current conjuncture? And I just think the way that the attitude that people have brought into speaking about that and actually doing it in a way where they've spoken very concretely about their own experiences of struggle in different parts of the continent, in Burkina Faso, in Egypt, in Zimbabwe and many other places. That has been really interesting, and it's shown really the way in which people who are politically engaged on the continent, I think, can come together and be having these sorts of conversations and be learning from each other. So that's really the takeaway that I've got at it. You know, the idea, it's very hard sometimes when you're in your own place, when you're in your own country, to sometimes see beyond that. But this has shown actually that there is a world beyond the immediacy of where we are, but not only is the world, there are like-minded people as well, like-minded activists who are facing similar problems or have had those problems and have tried to find particular sort of solutions, and how we can learn from that, and maybe how also others can learn lessons that we've had to deal with as well. So that kind of exchange, I think, is what I've taken away from it. It's been really educational.
Magnificent. And your parting words to the audience of Rope?
I think those were my parting words, but if I've got any others, I think now the real acid test is going to be is how the spirit of these workshops is going to be translated actually into the pages of the journal. So I mean, the journal is already very good actually, I think, in terms of the analysis it provides, the concerns it has, the kind of people it has writing on it. But more could be done. I think still it would be good to see more voices from Africa really coming straight into the journal, and work being done to have more of that. And also really the question of where the journal is located and where it's controlled from. I mean, the fact of the matter is for a whole variety of historical circumstances which are not of people's own choosing, it is located in the north, it is located in the UK. And I think when you're here on the continent, it does feel distant actually. So those questions of like, who really controls the journal, who's really making the sort of decisions within the editorial working group, I think are also really key. And I hope that this opens up the beginning or accelerates a process of thinking about how at that level as well the journal can become more rooted in the continent. It may not be possible to move it back to the continent now, I'm not sure, but if it's not, are there ways in which we can have yet more African activists and scholars involved in the real business of running the journal through the editorial working group, and what are the ways in which we can actually continue to build on this re-embedding of it in the continent?
Okay, for a question from me personally, what is the scope and capacity of youth to participate in the journal, in contributing to filling the journal, the scope of activists that we saw in contributing to the journal? And I'm asking this question with the incident of the politic, I think it was called, in which a community member contributed, and then there was controversy around, the manner in which is it acceptable. So how can we bring a balance into that? Because we're already inviting ordinary comrades to come and contribute in the workshops. How can we translate that into the pages of the journal?
Well, I think for a start we've got to recognise that Rope as a journal with this kind of mission does face a difficult balancing act, because at the end of the day its bread and butter is as an academic journal which has to reach certain kinds of standards which are set externally. In terms of what an academic article is considered to look like, how it's reviewed, what it actually means to be published in a peer-reviewed journal, and it has to deliver on that particular mandate if it's going to survive as a journal in its current form. But that doesn't mean that alongside that it can't also be possible to open up spaces towards other sorts of interventions. So it's already tried to do that, I think, to an extent through its debate section, where there are shorter pieces where it's particularly trying to draw in activist voices. But I think it's one thing to say that, you know, we've got this space where people can write stuff, but actually then providing the facility for people to write stuff, to get it into the journal, is something else. And to my mind, really, what there needs to be is actually the sort of infrastructure which is going to support activists on the continent who do want to get their voices into the journal, but maybe haven't got the experience of doing that kind of writing. And it's, so how do we then bridge that gap in a way where it's not threatening, where it builds people's confidence and keep people's capacities to do that type of work? I think that's really important. So actually supporting people with their writing, or maybe using other forms like interviews and that kind of thing, you know, to really think even more creatively really about how it would be possible to get people, a wider range of voices into the journal. That would be very, very good.
Thank you so much.